right, everybody. Welcome back to the Bet On C2C Podcast. Welcome into week 3, and we are on episode 5 here. And I have a full panel tonight. Finally, we have everyone back in the chat here in the space. I got Mr. Chris K, of course, at Realist Kiss K on Twitter. He is back from his bye week. Sir, did you enjoy your time at in some beach weather? How was that?
I did. It was great. I feel totally recharged from that, writing up all that content for week 1, which was nuts. But I feel like I didn't miss the best of games. The Georgia one against Oregon could have been fun, but I had that on the beach, and then within 10 minutes knew it was going to happen, and then was able to watch the Notre Dame Ohio State game. So I got enough action where I didn't feel like I was missing out. FOMO, you know.
There you go. And of course, we have Mr. We Are Penn State, Ethan Sauers. At Ethan Sauers, how are we doing tonight, buddy?
Doing real good. I realized today that we are about 25% of the way done after this week of our main slate college football action on DraftKings.
Oh,
it's
man.
Crazy stuff.
That makes me sad, kind of. Especially with the slate we're going to talk about. Man, it's this industry slate, so it'll be pretty cool as well. You're also the most bearded man here. I think Moxley's shortly behind you, but I did have an accident, so you can see the chin strap is back. I pulled it out of my 20s. I promise, the beard will grow back before the season's end, and it'll be in full swing. Of course, we have our special guest. I call him the King of G5. He's also a betting guru and a PrizePicks fan himself at Chris Moxley 19. Chris, Mox, my man, welcome to the show.
That was a really nice introduction.
You're welcome.
Usually I don't even get one on the shows that I'm on, so I appreciate that, y'all. No, I'm really hyped to be here. I mean, I listen to y'all. I take your advice. I think that the college fantasy betting game in space is expanding in a way that's really exciting. So I'm happy to hopefully contribute a little bit to y'all's show tonight.
Definitely. We're going to have an extra segment here after we go through some of our stuff here where Moxie's going to lay out just some of the basics for some of your betting. We're on that kick. We had Jared on last week. We kind of gave him just the rundown of how DFS is played. So this week, we're going to have Moxley kind of share his just tips and tricks and stuff like that when it comes to betting and lines and how you can kind of make some profit just by just remembering some of these key tidbits of things. So definitely excited to have you on. Let's do a little housekeeping before we get started. Of course, you can find all of our stuff at campus2canton.com. There's constant articles. There's tools. I think there's some new tools that are in the works that I'm hearing about as well through our Slack channel. So be looking out for that. We're going to have some new stuff there as well. Of course, the guides are still there if you're needing to reference in. Need to find out who maybe is wide receiver 2 in Tulsa, or you got something that you need to kind of figure out between who to start and sit. Maybe some of those guys will kind of help you out there as well. Of course, the different memberships and so much more. Speaking of memberships, and I'm going to have Mr. Moxley talk about this one. We have a brand new one. Of course, it's the $29.99 offer of the in-season edge. Moxley, why don't you tell them, what they're getting, what some of the benefits of having this package here this year?
Yeah, this is a cool opportunity to basically get all of our upper tier content for just the season. $29.99 gets you access to all of the betting content, which is kind of the big attraction, right? I post my lines in the Discord, which you get private access to if you sign up for this as well. And I do that a lot of times on Sunday, soon as lines drop, so we can beat the money for the most part, beat the public, allow us to get, edges here and there that over the course of the season, let us come on top. It also gives us everything from the scholarship tier, which is our second tier of membership, which gives you access to all of our tools, all of our team data, all of our coach data. There's a ton of good nuggets in there. If you're looking to find things like EPA per play or defensive success rate, really advanced metrics that are, harder to come by in the public sphere, the other stuff that you can find on the website, or just how Devi production, get some really cool graphs. And our mastermind, Jarek, has done a great job bringing all those tools together. You also get the opportunity to check out what we're delivering before anybody else get a chance to test it. It's a really fun membership because it gives you everything just for the season. And then if you like what we do, you can sign up for long term and you can become best friends with us. Opportunity is there. But no, this is really cool. And, with that PrizePicks promo code, you get $29.99 back. Could go straight to this opportunity. I'm just saying.
Exactly. And of course, to tie in with that, you get these wonderful articles by these other two gentlemen here, Mr. K and Mr. Sauers as well. I know they are dropping weekly. I believe Chris and Ethan will have one either. If you see them today or tomorrow, I know you guys are dropping some good stuff here very shortly. So be on the lookout for that as well. Just like Moxley was saying, hey, we have a sweet promo code. It's at, just C2C, and that's at PrizePicks. Of course, we do a segment every single week to try to help you guys hit on that type of money, but you do get a matching deposit up to $100. So why would you not do that? Plus, it's a little kickback. It kind of helps you over there when it comes to our membership that we just talked about. So definitely go check that out. All right, boys, I think it's time to go into Campus Picks. Of course, that is presented by PrizePicks, and we'll split it up here. And let's start off with the week. I got me and Kay up first. Chris, why don't you tell me one of your favorites that you got going on here?
Yeah, well, they released a bunch of stuff here a couple hours ago, which was pretty cool. And they're getting even more unique with you can do like bet attempts or completions, which is it's very degen, but it's very awesome. But the ones I have here are passing yards and receiving yards. So Sam Hartman over 305. And Bryce Young over 295 passing and rushing yards, and the A.T. Perry over 92.5 receiving yards. I just think, Sam Hartman came out and was great against Vandy in a bad weather game. The guy threw for 4,500 yards last year. 300 is that's a pretty thin number. That's a pretty low number, all things considered. And then, of course, A.T. Perry is his number one guy. And it almost kind of feels like there's not really a number two. It's like a one and then a bunch of threes, which is always great. He gets a bunch of targets, and he's a big play machine. I think he had something like a maybe 50-plus yard touchdown catch last week against Vandy. So, he could do it on 2 or 3 catches. It's very conceivable. And then finally, Bryce Young. He ran for 100 or something like that in week one, right? Didn't he have a huge rushing game in week one? And then, he's a passing machine. So this was actually a better number when it was released. I think it was like 280, which that just felt really, really good. But between the passing and I think he's going to run a little bit this year, which he's kind of shown already, that 295 number feels really low. That feels low for just passing, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm really digging Hartman being back. I think AT is his boy. So immediately we just see the jump up. We were kind of hoping that Sam was going to be back a little earlier just because I think just the narrative of AT and Sam together as a duo kind of makes sense. So just, the tide rises all ships. Of course, with the Heisman, UNLM, that's a sweet matchup too. So I think that's a pretty good pairing to go along with it. For me, I wanted to hop on the locomotive known as the Clone King himself, Mr. Stetson Bennett. I think it's time that we put a little bit more respect on his name. The guy has had over 20 fantasy points and it has climbed every single week that he's played. And he plays South Carolina. No offense to Mr. Moxley. I know he's gotten rid of his flag behind there, but that's okay. I still like his fish better. But he plays a good matchup. And I think Stetson, especially with he has his stuff. I just, it's in a smaller box right now, but it's all good. But I still think it's a great matchup for him. He's got a ton of weapons. He seems to have the passing game going as good as the rushing game. So I think altogether, Stetson can probably get over that more as well. Then I wanted to talk about Mr. Marshawn Ford, who I've had the pleasure or sometimes the frustration of having, over a couple of years in Dynasty as well. And the thing with Marshawn Ford is it takes him a couple of games to kind of get the ball rolling. Sometimes Cunningham, that's his go-to. Sometimes he's forgotten about. Right now, looking at it as is the Hudson show, and then he's kind of being seen as the third target right now as well. So for now, I'm taking the less on 7.5 fantasy points because he hasn't even touched 7 fantasy points yet as far as Fantrax, as far as what I've seen. So taking the less on Marshawn Ford. Any thoughts on these two, or do you think this is a good thing as we move on?
Yeah, I like the Marshawn Ford play. He's kind of gotten lost with the Louisville offense sputtering a little bit early. One thing I did notice though last week is it does look like Cunningham's kind of seeking him out on those plays where things are starting to break down a little bit. I know he mentioned he wants to be a more of a passer this year, and we've seen that with his just the play style that we've seen so far. More runs heavy with Tyon Evans, it seems. So, I think that Marshawn Ford line is a good line. The one thing I worry about is him just catching a touchdown because he is that big body. But with the way Louisville's offense has been playing, I don't know if there's going to be that many red zone opportunities for them. So we'll see. And then on Chris's over there, love that Bryce Young pick. Definitely in a get right spot against Louisiana Monroe. I feel for them getting ready to send an edible arrangement their way because it's not going to be a pretty weekend for them for sure.
Yeah, they got to take out some of that frustration from that Texas game. That was a little rough. I'm sure Coach Saban's had them probably puking their brains out this probably past week in practice for sure.
Especially since, wasn't it like 15 penalties? Like, if you're going to just win 20-19, I think Saban can take that if that's the difference. Like, if truly Bama was 1 point better on that day, right? But there were 15 penalties. Like, Saban's going to light them up this week. I feel bad for anybody facing Bryce Young, and I do in the 50-teamers, so it's not going to be great.
Yep.
Very uncharacteristically undisciplined last week.
Yeah, it was very interesting as well. All right, Ethan, let's start with yours. I'm interested because you got a lot of people around our area that I'm keen on. So I definitely said something in Slack earlier where I didn't want to say it out loud because it's yucky for me. But Duke actually has some pretty decent offense going on recently. I've been paying attention. I've always been a Calhoun fan, but it finally seems they find a decent quarterback that can kind of get it to him. So very intrigued by the Duke pick. And of course, I love my Keaton Mitchell there in EC. So tell me about your picks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So Riley Leonard has been a very pleasant surprise with that Duke offense in general. Did not expect to see them as efficient and as productive as they've been early on this season. Getting, believe, Coach Elks, is that his name? I forget. I know it's a new coach over there for Duke. So defensive minded, and definitely thought we were going to get a pretty run heavy approach, but they've just really surprised out the gate. We've got a nice cushy matchup here for Duke with North Carolina A&T, I believe. They are FCS, obviously. So I'm expecting Riley Leonard to show his athleticism. He's been able to pick up some nice added production with his legs. With 20.5 points or 20.5 rushing yards, I think that's easily doable against an inferior opponent. And I think that he's going to get an opportunity to really just blossom with that offense this week. We've got Keaton Mitchell against Campbell. Keaton Mitchell, definitely a guy who is explosive and is a guy who really is kind of matchup driven. We need to see matchups for him against defenses that allow the explosive plays and allow the big play. So targeting him against a defense that's not going to be as athletic as he, I think makes great sense. With 91.5 yards, Keaton Mitchell can get that on 2 carries any given week with the speed that he's got. So we're going to bet on that moving forward this weekend. We've got Clay Millen, again, kind of the opposite of that Duke offense. This Colorado State offense has sputtered and just not really looked great early on this season. We may have jumped the gun a little bit with Norvell and his staff being able to make great change after the Adazio era in Colorado State here. So Clay Millen with 12.5 fantasy points. I like the over here against Washington State. I know Washington State was pretty stingy against Wisconsin this past weekend. However, Clay Millen in garbage time, connecting with Torrey Horton, it's a combination that I like, and 12.5 points. Even if he throws a few interceptions, I think the game script is going to mandate them throwing the ball. And so if he's able to get a few touchdowns, maybe late in the game, I think that's where we see our over hit. And then that last one here in the Power 4, I've got Trey Palmer over 4.5 receptions for the game. We've got them going up against Oklahoma. Again, a pretty tough matchup. But we are out of the Scott Frost era, and when I look at teams playing with interim head coaches, they tend to feed the most talented player on the field. I think Trey Palmer is that for Nebraska. I think he's going to get plenty of opportunity. It is going to be a negative pass or a negative game script, so they are going to have to pass quite a bit. But I think that's just going to fuel the fire for him, and I see him going over that 4.5 number.
I extremely like the Clay Millen play. I've been doing some things where you just project and stuff like that. Clay Millen's actually getting a really good, decent amount of run game, whether he's running for his life or not. I mean, that's the case, but the dude is actually getting some ground to go along with the passing to Horton. So I definitely like that 12.5. That's a sweet one. And I definitely agree with Trey Palmer. And I think it's time now that maybe Nebraska can finally unlock without Frost kind of getting in the way. And we finally see what the true potential of Trey Palmer is now that he's transferred and he's got a good spot with Casey Thompson as well. Let's move over to Mox. Definitely on brand with the Brad Roberts and the Daniel Dell. But you got, a little homer going in there as well. But I like that prop because minus 8.5, I think he can get over that just by just running alone. So tell me about your props and why you chose them there, Mox.
Yeah, so I love the Hartman over that Chris K had earlier. It's excellent. He put it in before I did, so I was like, crap, I can't duplicate the Hartman one. I like that number a lot, and I love the Riley Leonard number as well. Two numbers that I am both tailing. I think they're very, very interesting and probably too low. For mine, Rattler has less than 8.5 rushing yards. So in his first two games against Georgia State and Arkansas, he had -12 and -23. He's mobile, but he's not like a great rusher. The South Carolina offensive line is awful. They returned all 5 starters, and all 5 starters weren't very good last year. And somehow this group with continuity got worse. How? I don't know. I've watched it for 2 weeks, and I have seen it play out, though. They're going to get destroyed in the trenches against Georgia. I don't trust this group. I think Rattler is going to be under pressure all night. I think we're seriously... he could have like -30 rushing yards. Like this might be just be a bloodbath for Spencer Rattler. Very concerned. 8.5, I think, is a little too low. Like I might play this number up to like 10.5, to be totally honest. I'm very concerned as a Gamecock fan. Second number I like, Brad Roberts over 17.5 fantasy points. And what I like about this number versus his rushing total, which I believe is like 111 or 110.5, it gives me flexibility with the touchdowns. And so he might have 2 touchdowns, but go over or under 100 yards. I think that's a very real possibility given that they're I believe 16.5 point favorites this week against Wyoming. So the touchdowns, I think, can save you in the realm where he doesn't do that. I think he gets 1. I think there's a good chance he goes over the rushing prop too. So I like getting him at 17.5. I actually think that's a pretty big discount if we think that he could punch in a couple touchdowns. And he's basically a fullback, right? Like he's a big dude. They want to use him in the red zone. They want to use him in the goal line. He is their goal line back. He's their anytime back, really. But with that triples option offense, I like that opportunity to get that 17.5. And then give me Nathaniel Dell, Houston wide receiver, going over 18.5. He has hit this in 7 of his last 9 games going back to last season. We just saw JT Daniels, who, he seems healthy for the time being, but he just threw for 365 and 3 against Kansas. Houston plays Kansas this week. Dell's coming off a 10 for 150 performance. This Kansas matchup does not scare me in the slightest. I am all over Dell this week. I think 18.5, again, like this Roberts line, gives a little flexibility on the touchdowns, which is why I honestly like to play the fantasy points lines, because it gives you multiple ways to get there versus a singular reception or receiving total or passing total. So fantasy points for my G5 boys, and I think Rattler's going to get freaking destroyed this week.
I don't know if you watched, but Dell had a punt return for touchdown taken back against Texas Tech too.
There we go. There's a lot of ways that I think Dell can hit this number.
That's the second punt return that was called back in 2 weeks too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's bound to get that.
Yeah. And I think Kansas has a pretty poor last year they did. I haven't checked this year, but they have a pretty poor special teams as well. Their field position against this year is 23rd, but last year it was 118th. So it might be really bad again. We just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, well, they last year they never got first downs, so they were always punting from their own 20, so that probably hurt them. But I think you say it right? Like these are the perfect opportunities to do fantasy score rather than yardage. Brad Roberts could certainly go over 110 or whatever, but it's way more likely he's going to score two touchdowns and get you 70 rushing yards, and you'd still be fine. And then Dell, of course, as well. A little trivia for you here, Mox. Do you know who is last place in sacks this year as a team defense?
Is it going to be UGA?
It's Georgia. They have one sack. They only had one against Samford.
Because they're outscoring everybody. They don't need to sack anyone right now. It's ridiculous.
I am so terrified. I've seen the South Carolina line play for 2 weeks. Whew. They might be worse than Samford. That's the concern that I have with him. I didn't know that though. That's pretty interesting.
I wonder too. I heard this on one of the C2C podcasts. Something about the connection that Kirby Smart has with the Samford head coach, and how there might have been a little bit of gamesmanship and not running up the score, or maybe sending some exotic pass rush last week. I don't know about that, but I heard there might have been some courtesy involved in that as well.
I'd believe it.
Oh, I wish I knew that ahead of time.
Yeah,
Oregon. I would have taken their under a lot earlier in the week than at like 11:50 on Saturday.
Rise, yeah.
For sure. And Moxley, I like the Nathaniel Dell pick. I've been really heavy on that Houston offense and DFS for both of the last 2 weeks. They've been just a little bit disappointing. That offensive line, it worries me a little bit because they just have not been able to give Tune any sort of protection. I'm really hoping this is a get-right spot for them coming off a disappointing loss for all of our fantasy sake. But, I mean, Nathaniel Dell, it's so difficult to not just really smash him into DFS lineups. This week continues that streak for me. So,
oh, yeah,
the narrative's pretty good. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't love the Kansas front seven either. I don't think there's an impact player. I mean, I don't know. It depends how you define impacts. Lonnie Phillips is pretty good, but I don't think there's an impact player on that front seven that's going to cause Houston a lot of problems. And I think that their trench plays better than maybe we saw last week, just as a unit. But we will see. Not to dive into the weeds of offensive line and defensive line play. I know that's not what we're trying to do here.
That's why you're here. We need some of that.
Yes. And I like the narrative. I just think I don't think Kansas should be scared of Houston either. I mean, I think we have a narrative of a possible shootout, and we'll kind of get into that as we move along, as we get into Bank on It, which of course is presented by DraftKings. So we did our lineups for the week as well. And I've noticed a lot of similarities, a lot more than usual than we usually have. I know sometimes we have like one or two, but I'm really into this. And I'll talk to you first, Kay. Judkins, man, I think he's a super sneaky pick, man. I love everything about it. He's doing and producing. It's a great pivot away from Zach Evans. And we're trying to still figure out the Mississippi passing game, so why not focus on the run game that's actually having some pretty decent success. For me, I paired him with the other freshman. You know me, I love freshmen. That's my the name of fame, right? But Jaden out of California, who's going up against a Notre Dame team that isn't as scary anymore. All of a sudden, you can run on them. You saw what Marshall did to them. So I like the pairing. What do you think? What was it about Judkins? Was it the price, or just because he's doing so well, even behind Evans, Chris?
Well, I think Ole Miss's offense is just going to get better as they figure out the quarterback play, and they'll always have the running game to rely on. Just a great matchup. He's been very productive. This is going to be more of like a 1A, 1B than it is like him as a backup. I'm projecting something like 40-something% for Evans, and then Judkins like 30% rushing usage. And in a game like this, it's a really productive line, and at that low of a cost. So yeah, I mean, I think it was Nate that was pretty early on in him in the offseason that was talking about him, and I got him in the 50-teamer, and he's proven to be very good, and he's done it 2 weeks straight to start. So
yeah, Mox, wasn't it Matt that was big on Judkins coming in as a prospect?
Yeah, he wrote him up for our Canton freshman supplemental guide, and he was one of the few who kind of believed in his size-speed combination. I was also skeptical, so I won't pretend like I was one of the first dudes on this, but yeah, Matt liked him as well, and Nate was obviously, I think, a big fan early. So couple folks were out ahead, and they're obviously reaping the benefits of being early to it.
It's interesting just how is Bentley hurt? Is he just not factoring in? Like, I haven't been able to really check out Ole Miss. Is he just falling off and Judkins just that much better, or is Bentley hurt? Like, what's the issue with Bentley? Have we heard anything?
I think he's just getting outplayed.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy at SMU was very average in my opinion, and it was just pure volume, and that's why he produced. And then sometimes he just fell on his face and did nothing. Going to Ole Miss was about as bad of a decision as you get. I've talked about a million times. These guys literally make the worst decisions when it comes to transferring. It's like, pay me $20, I'll tell you where to go, and it'll be better than going to Ole Miss. Like,
they should just reach out.
Like,
to us
what are you doing, man? So I don't know. I mean, Judkins is obviously a very good young running back, all things considered. So, I mean, technically, theoretically, Bentley could be pretty good too, but he's just getting outplayed.
Yep. I also noticed that we were big on both Mo Ibrahim. For me, it's just chalk play. I want the consistency. Mo is just destroying anyone in his path. The comeback game is real. Colorado is not scary whatsoever. And Mo's going to smash and get his 20 fantasy points plus easy in the first half. And then we're going to see Trey Potts do his thing. I think it's a great pairing. And then when this is all said and done, the real Zach Evans will take his place as, the next guy up here in the next few seasons. But it's the same thing with you, just good chalk play, just going to be good, consistent points, worth the price of admission.
I don't know how chalky he'll be. It'll be interesting because if Chuck Sizzle was still super cheap, I could see Ibrahim being super high owned. But I don't know. I mean, in terms of play, he's amazing. I wrote him up for the article for the main slate, and it's something like 8 games in his last 10. And I know he missed all of last year, basically, of like 25 plus fantasy points. And then 6 out of those 10 are 30 plus. And then he's got games of like 46 and 52 against like Michigan and Wisconsin or something. Like, the guy's just been crazy productive. Even coming, like, that was the big concern, was the injury, and nothing has happened. My only worry would be, they run it really well. Would they just take it easy on them? Who do they play next week? What are they prepping for? Because they have a bunch of backs that are good. So I don't know. I mean, they haven't really done it yet, but that would be my concern at 9,400, is they kind of pump the brakes a little bit and say, okay, well, you'll get your 100 and a touchdown, which is not going to be enough at that price.
Right.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
I know I don't have I'm y'all are going to see that are watching the video that I get relentlessly mocked and memed as a guest on the show. Does that not put Trayshawn Potson in range for you? I mean, I don't know what his ownership looks like, and I haven't even glanced at those projections, but I mean, they're what, 20, or they're like 18-point favorites. I don't know what it's moved up to currently, but
27.5.
Wow.
Okay.
27.5. I mean, you got to think Potts is getting 15, 20 touches, and he's been really efficient so far. So
that was going to be my next kind of topic here, is that Mo's getting really expensive there and into the uneasy territory in pricing, in my opinion. I mean, it's a smash spot for sure playing Colorado. To Chris's point, their next week game is at Michigan State. So, they do start Big Ten play and have a sneaky look ahead spot here. Whenever we get up to 9,400 and we see a running back that is even remotely splitting carries with another running back, it seems like an easy fade. It's not going to be a full fade. I think that's not a smart choice to do a full fade of anybody in that kind of a position, but I'm going to be underweight on him compared to the field. It seems that, when I look back and I do kind of the lineup review over there on Fantasy Cruncher, and I look at the lineups that are consistently winning those big tournaments, there very rarely is it 2 really high price running backs anchoring a lineup. Because with the running back position, just the way that it hits with touchdown variance and things like that, usually there's going to be a mid-range guy on the slate that's going to open things up and really propel lineups forward that are focusing and putting that money elsewhere. That's not to say that no big running back ever hits, but at 9,400, we're looking for 36 points that we want to see out of him. And splitting with Potts, that worries me about what his touchdown equity is going to be this Saturday.
Yeah, so totally reasonable, by the way. The crazy thing is, when you split like he does, it's still Minnesota's offense. So, like, I have him projected for 38% of carries, and it's 19. Like, that's going to be – that feels even high. That feels a tad high. But I can see your point. And I think the scary thing is you see stuff like this Dorian Thompson-Robinson stuff that came out today. It was like Chip Kelly just all of a sudden was like, I want to let the other guys play, kind of like Penn State did, right, against Ohio. And Charbonnet, I think, either didn't even play or got one snap or something. I know there was a discrepancy. I didn't watch that game. But, like, it almost seems like these superstars against these lower level competition are playing like a quarter, and then they're getting they're pumping the brakes and pulling them back a little bit once they see they're up 20-0 or something, right? So that I would be a concern with Michigan State being up next week. I think in terms of I think he's probably more of a cash game play because it just feels like an automatic lock for 25 plus, and I do think there's enough value, but I could see in tournaments why you would want to shy away for sure.
Yeah. And I did see where you put Charbonnet back in. Are you banking on, people kind of being hesitant because of the mishap last week? Are you banking because Charbonnet can easily do 36 fantasy points, and that's well over the 6,300. That's, of course, its value in goals. So are you thinking of that mindset?
I mean, he essentially is practiced, right? And at 6,300, this is one of those, like, if you don't play him and everybody else does, I mean, it's just going to be a lot. That's a low price. That's going to be really hard to fade a guy like Charbonnet. He could easily go for 35 points. Like, he doesn't even need the volume. I think last year, right, he had like 6 touchdowns in 3 games on like 20 carries or something crazy. So in that Chip Kelly offense, anything can happen. They're going to put up a ton of points. And I think South Alabama is decent enough to keep that close, right? Like the concern would be, well, it's going to be a blowout or, maybe they do it again. Maybe something's nagging and because of it, right? Like Jalen Knighton last week against Southern Miss, like that was written on the wall to me. He was available. He missed the week before. He got like 5 carries. Like that was just a no-brainer because it was Southern Miss and they had no quarterback. I think they ended up starting a true freshman. So Charbonnet, on the other hand, is going to face a real team with a real offense that could put up some points alongside him. And because of it, I think as long as he continues to practice, there's no reason to shy away from it.
Yep. I do see a tight end alert that's hiding in the wide receiver there, Mr. Michael Trigg. $3,400 is a ridiculously low price, especially for the production that he's capable of. I know we have a situation at quarterback, and I think they'll iron it out eventually whenever Lane decides to. Maybe he'll read the Book of Solomon. We'll never know. But until then, what do you like about Trigg? Is it Georgia Tech? Is it just he's getting the opportunities?
I mean, he was a touchdown machine in the spring game. That's like the whole thing coming into it. And now he leads the team in targets. He had 7 the first week. He didn't do anything with them. I didn't see the game, but I imagine based on the quarterback stat lines, everybody was awful because of it, right? Like Jalen Robinson has looked pretty bleak, if anything, because of it, I think. And who knows what his real role is, but like Trigg has definitely been impacted by it with 7 targets the first game, 6 last game. I mean, they're going to score, right? So who are they throwing to? If they get close to the end zone, to me, they're going to run it in or they're going to throw it to Trigg. And at 3,400, it's not going to take a ton, right? Like in the cash game, you don't need a whole lot. In tournaments, you probably are looking at like 15 points, but 4 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown is basically there. That's not that unreasonable at all. And like I said earlier, I think the Mississippi offense gets better. I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. I always like Dart, but it seemed like Altmaier was pretty good for a little bit. And then I think he got hurt, right? And then Dart came in and looked good. Who knows who it'll be, but in this situation, it doesn't matter. I think Kiffin's a smart guy. He'll pick whoever he thinks is the best, and that'll be the benefit for Trigg.
All right, as the guy who didn't submit any lineups and now gets a chance to critique everybody and ask questions,
Yes.
Which the role that I'm relishing. Are you more comfortable with Trig as a cash play than a GPP play? I mean, 3,400 and you're getting him off a 2-touchdown performance. Like he's got to have decent ownership, right?
I would feel fine in both. I think at that price, it doesn't matter. Like I think
that's
in either format, if he was in the 4s, I would probably make him just straight like tournament just because, then the quarterback play comes into play. Now I'm looking at maybe needing 18, 19, 20 points. But I mean, a fair question, because I don't know if you guys talked about it last week, but there's a definitive difference between like cash games and tournament plays, right? Like you want to play percentages to an extent and you want to play upside versus some floors. So I think it's a fair question for sure.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I've got Trig in mind, not to spoil my lineup here. Trig, I mean, at 3.4, it's easy pickings on that one. When it comes to cash play and tournaments, I mean, the way that I break it down is in a tournament, I'm just going to want more of him because I know he's going to be highly owned. So when it comes down to it, you just want to be more, you want to try and leverage that ownership and just be even more on top of it. So if you're projecting 40% ownership for him on a week like this, I think that's easy to kind of project and see 35-40% ownership, even though it's a huge slate, 13 games. That just means I'm going to want to have at least 60%. If I'm rolling with Trig, I'm going to want to at least double the field on that.
Yeah, that mindset comes into play, especially when we'll talk about, our good friends of Western Kentucky. Reed, you're playing Corley, you're playing Davis. They keep disrespecting Davis with these prices, man, just because of what the kid's capable of. It's just blatant disrespect. But hey, it's just more the reapings for us. But kind of the same narrative. We're kind of looking at, WKU. We're looking at like a Mo Ibrahim or, a Charbonnet to kind of keep us with the pack. But then we start to do the separation. So for me, I wanted to go a little bit more contrarian on this one and just bring it up, and I'll let you critique. But the matchup between Kansas and Houston is favorable, and it looks like it could possibly go into another shootout. We see what happened with Texas Tech last week. I know Texas Tech will be considered a little bit more offensively explosive, but Kansas has been proven. It's mainly under the legs of Devin Neal, but at the same time, he has been catching touchdowns as well. And so I did pair Daniels with Skinner being one of their top targets there at Kansas to go along with it. I just don't think a lot of people are going to be on it. I think people are scared of Kansas still, unless it's Devin Neal. So I wanted to be super contrarian. I know it might cost me, and I have other lineups. There's other ones we'll talk about where you can pair Georgia, who I don't think a lot of people are going to be on Stetson. They're still scared of him, just like I had to really think about it before. I was like, you know what? Stetson has earned enough of me understanding what he's been able to play the past 2 games to warrant him to be over a 20 fantasy point production. So it's like, he's Mr. Consistent. So you can say the same thing about playing Georgia offensive players now, other than Brock Bowers or, the proper tight ends or whatever. But this is kind of how you kind of look at it. It's like, hey, let me do as much as I can to stay with the pack, and then let's separate it a little bit. So that's where I decided to go with Kansas. Chris, you didn't get a chance to look at it. I think, you're kind of putting in your stuff as well. What do you think about Kansas against Houston? Do you think it's too contrarian? Do you think it's right on money? Is it too off-centric?
I just think they're a little bit more run focused, and Skinner's not expensive, so that's not going to be anything crazy. If you would have gone, I think Arnold's the most expensive receiver, then that's a little bit, or Grimm maybe, then that's a little bit interesting. I would say if you think the game is going to be close and Kansas is going to, or at least Kansas is going to score, then you should run it back with a Houston guy, which obviously would be Dell, which I think we all agree is a great option. So that would be kind of a critique there. I think Kansas is going to be decent enough. They're not going to be like the walkover type they've been. Leopold has been awesome. I think he just runs programs the right way and just creates winners with like that whole mindset, chemistry, and coaching style. I just think it'll be a little bit more run focused. Although I do think Daniels is in play, is we would call it maybe naked Daniels, where you don't stack them. I think is a viable option as well.
Yeah, I did think about swapping out Skinner for a guy like Dell, or moving Ibrahim down, taking a guy like Charbonnet for cheaper, things like that. There's some plays here that you can move around with.
I love Jalen Daniels this week, by the way. I think I think you're absolutely right about ownership. I think that people are still a little hesitant to play the Kansas offense, and that Houston secondary is not the strength of that team. They're going to struggle on the ground this week. I think they're to win this game, they're going to have to throw. And so I'm fine. Yeah. I am fine going Daniels naked. Actually, that's a really good point that Chris brought up, because he has the rushing ability, and that target, there's no consistent target share across the board there. So Grimm is, I haven't seen the slate yet. I think Grimm is probably the most expensive, or at least he should be. But I think you can get away with Daniels naked too. I think that's pretty interesting outcome. It's not just because of the rushing; it's more so the target share. But I think if you think Kansas keeps this close, it's because of the passing. So I like Jalen Daniels this week, and I don't know what his projected ownership is or anything, but I give that an A+.
His ownership is going to be sub 4%. I think with Trader at 64 and him at 65. It's going to be huge leverage there. Fully agree on the run back call. I think you need to run back any Kansas offense with either Nathaniel Dell or Matt Golden. I think that we saw Donovan Smith have some success scrambling last week. Anytime with the Superflex and the way that DraftKings prices quarterbacks, there is such valuable upside to cheap mobile quarterbacks and just running them naked, not stacking them with anybody. I think that's one of the prime ways to attack a DraftKings slate is with a naked mobile quarterback.
What do you, regarding Jalen Daniels, maybe Moxley, this is for you. He going into this season, he was really a 2-yard per carry guy, and he's really done pretty well, and he's running at a pretty high rate. Is he more than that? Is he would you put him in the 3 to 4 yards per carry category? Because that, regarding his usage, that's an extra couple of fantasy points if you see that uptick.
I do. They return I believe 5 offensive linemen, or at least 4. And so I think that unit as a whole is going to be better. He's going to take less sacks. And so yardage obviously matters for the majority of platforms we play on, regardless of what you're doing. He's a good rusher, in my opinion. He is not a non-zero. He is not a guy who scramble. I think he's a legit rusher. He's obviously not Jason Bean, who's the backup, but I like Jalen Daniels. I think he can do some damage with his legs. I don't know if this is the question is, I don't know is this the week that he can do it with? Because I think this defensive line is a high-end Power 5 level defensive line. This is not a joke. It's just, can he get outside the pocket and avoid the legitimately very athletic, very good defensive ends? I don't know. I do think Jalen Daniels is a legit rusher, though. I don't want to I think he's a 40 to 50 yards without sack yardage guy. I think that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, him and Neal are a dangerous duo, especially in run capacity. And when you have a team like Houston, Neal's going to be, he was pretty high expensive from what I saw, and I figured that a lot of people are going to probably be on Neal just because of the matchup as well. CFF-wise, I was super happy to just take Devin Neal and put him into the starting position. CFF-wise, he's going to smash. So definitely super excited about Neal this week as well. Ethan, I want to ask you, because you're the stacking guy, how often do you see it to where you do a stack where it's one quarterback from one and then a wide receiver the other? Do you think that's pretty common? Is it uncommon because of the slate this week, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a really common way to attack. I think the differentiation, if you've played NFL DFS versus college DFS, you have more opportunity to do double stacks and game stacks in college, just with the higher scoring nature. So in the college DFS, it's even more valuable, and we see that all the time with lineup distribution. It simplifies your lineup building process when you go. I need at least 3 players in games that are expected to go over 60. And when you're using optimizers too, Fantasy Cruncher, that optimizer, you're able to really dial into the nitty gritty and say, I want to be able to make sure all 150 of my lineups are going to have at least, if a quarterback plays, they have at least one receiving option coming back to them, or one opposing receiver coming back to them. So it makes it real easy, especially in those multi-entries. You're going to see very high stacking percentage.
Yeah, if you think about it, right, like to get first in a entry of 10,000 people where people have up to 150, and this might make this explicit, Brandon, I apologize. You have to hit the nuts, right? So
that's nothing. That's not like WAP. You're good.
That's not good. Okay, we're good. So I'll say it again. No, I'm just kidding. So, and how do you do that? Well, you predict the game script to be like Ethan's saying, this high scoring game that stays close, right? Like if you think Skinner and Daniels are going to be great options, Kansas scores, then like how do they continue to have a 40-point game? It's because Houston performs, and then you just pick your favorite Houston option. I don't think you have to force it. I think last week, Saturday, I got a little cute, and I did that with like the Wake Forest game and the Texas Tech game. And I think I even did like maybe Texas and one other one, and it kind of bit me a little bit. I think like you can just kind of naturally let it play out, but I think it's a very valid way to do it, because if you're trying to win against 10,000 people, or 10,000 entries, I should say, like you have to have the perfect lineup, right? You have to have it where one guy pushes the other, and that's how those huge 40 to 50 point performances come.
Yeah, and just, I mean, it's a big slate. We've got 13 games this week as opposed to 14 games on the slate last week. But still, I mean, there's enough production across the games that the optimal lineup doesn't necessarily have all of that. But when you're talking percentages, you're talking correlated plays, you're talking about eliminating as many variables as you can to put yourself in a good position. I mean, if you don't stack, you're asking for too many things to have to go right to win.
I think you have to stack. I think you have to stack. The run back is where the murkiness comes, and then I think it's just personal preference at that point.
Yeah, I just didn't see as much run back. I mean, me personally, I don't do it, so that's why I'm just curious. I want to do it, and then the listeners get to hear the different options as well. Before we move on to the next slide. Kay, I know you have Strader on there. Do you have any thoughts on him against Purdue and why you decided to go with him on this run?
I mean, total caveman, but he's good at football. Like he's good at college football. He'll never play in the NFL, maybe CFL.
That's questionable, man.
But not as a quarterback, at least. But he runs a bunch. He scores on the ground, and he's throwing better than ever. What's funny is he was in that Mike Leach offense for about 10 minutes and was like, I'm out of here. And now he's got like another coach that wants to kind of chuck it a little bit. And he's been good. He's played real teams, like UConn is not a walkover. And I think they also played Louisville, right? Like those are real teams that you can't just get away with throwing for 250. So it's nice to see some of that production there, because if he's only rushing 13 for 25 yards, he doesn't have to be perfect on the ground in that scenario. So, I mean, at that price, like it's a no-brainer to me. What'll be getting really tricky is, Sean Tucker is an awesome play as well. Same reasons, just a lot of rushing, a lot of touchdowns. It's incredible. Almost as incredible as his Twitter account, by the way. But, what'll be interesting is, I don't think you could use both of them together, but I wonder if people do get a little tricky and use that as kind of like the run back, like Schrader and Tucker, and then go O'Connell with Chuck Sizzle. That could be a unique combination of players there.
Especially if they get out to a hot start. I know they got that home cooking in the Orange Dome, so I could see that being a nice stack, running it back with Tucker as opposed to Schrader.
And they're just super concentrated too, right? Like who else on Syracuse does anything? And Tucker's catching passes. He's got 10 catches. So maybe I just talked myself into it. I don't know.
You talked me into it.
Did you say concentrated because they're the Orangemen? Just asking.
I wish
Sorry, dad jokes.
I wish I was good like that, but I did not do that.
I was wondering if you did it on purpose. I was like, that's pretty funny if you did. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about Ethan's lineup. Don't pay attention to the crying Cam Jordan over there on the right-hand side. Before we go, let's talk about Chuck Sizzle and how it seems like him and maybe a couple others literally for the first time in like a while actually took down DraftKings for like a slight minute so they can readjust his price. I don't think they really realized that Chuck Sizzle was in his actual name, and so they couldn't find him when they did his pricing, and then they all of a sudden hopped back up. I was like, oh man, Chuck Sizzle's super cheap like last week. Let me go. He's 8,000 now. Oops, my bad. Chris, that's a rare thing, man, isn't it?
I haven't seen it often. Last year, there was enough people that created outrage over them, including some like Clemson Wofford game in the main slate in like week 7 or something where they took it down. But I haven't seen it. I don't think I've ever seen it for a player. And you can't say it wasn't because of Chuck Sizzle because he went from like 3,800 to 8,000. I mean, the guy was literally going to be 85% owned.
Yeah, it's a free play almost. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, so I'm glad they did. I don't have any issue with it. I commend them for it. You know, they make mistakes all the time, but like they don't always rectify it. So I'm glad that they did this time.
So, Ethan, talk to me about Bo Nix. I'm very interested, especially against a tougher BYU opponent. Why'd you decide for Nix this week?
Yeah, so I was the last one getting my DraftKings lineup posted here in our show sheet. So I wanted to go a little bit contrarian. I didn't want to just jam in, Garrett Schrader in there and see what we were doing. So this one definitely is a little bit more contrarian than what you guys had thrown in there. I like Bo Nix. Early in the year, we see teams that face tougher opponents early on. They seem to figure things out quicker. Even in a performance like they had against Georgia, they're never going to see that tough of a defense for the rest of the year. They got that out of the way. And with the new coaching staff and getting to figure out, what their identity is, I think that we were able to see, at least last week, Bo Nix up against Eastern Washington, 3 for 5 touchdowns. They figured out, what they want to do and how they want to let Bo Nix run. You'll notice that this is, standalone Bo Nix. This is naked Nix here. We are not really loving the BYU wide receiver situation for a run back. I don't know if Nakua and Romney are healthy again. I haven't heard an update there. But with the defenses, it's a tough game, but like I said earlier, the upside is just incredible with a cheap guy at quarterback. So 5.5 K coming into this weekend. That means I'm really, 20 points is a nice hit for Bo Nix. So they've got a 30.25 is their implied team total. You're hoping that Nix runs for 1, throws for 2, and hits value. It opens things up a little bit further down the lineup here. I didn't go with Quinshon Judkins either. Main reason for that is that I think when you're playing, and I mean, it's totally valid with the pricing this week, but whenever you're playing two guys at the same position or two guys at different positions with Trigg and Judkins, you're capping the upside somewhere. That's not to say that they both can't hit value. Like I said, they're so cheap that it almost is a given that they're going to hit some type of value. But I had Trigg going in here, so I kind of went off the board with Ontario Brown. He's also in a committee backfield, but he does seem to have the lead role there as to where Judkins is the 1A to Zach Evans, or the 1B to Zach Evans 1A. So here, I mean, we're really just hoping that Brown gets the right side of touchdown variance, being the lead back there. Vandy isn't a defense that scares me. I think that they can move the ball. However, I mean, Northern Illinois has been a little shaky early on this year, but I think that they're really still going to ground and pound with Brown and Whaley. So went with Brown there. Again, 5.5, not super expensive. We're kind of sticking with the mid-range guys here. I do like Mo Ibrahim. I mean, I told you the con to playing him, the high risk there, but in such a smash spot, you're going to have to pay up somewhere. Mo Ibrahim, it's not a bad play, but you're gonna want to be on the lookout for that touchdown variance, and maybe limit your ownership if you're multi-entering. Also went with a Western Kentucky stack. Did the double stack with Corley and Davis with Austin Reed. It's a scheme thing. I think Indiana has played better than we've expected them to early on in the season. I honestly thought they were going to be basement of the Big Ten. They still might be, but they beat Illinois. I always tend to lean more to scheme over anything else. And, I'm still feeling good about that Western Kentucky offense. I think Arbuckle's learning. I think they're figuring out how to get things together. Coming off a bye week, they're hopefully going to come in prepared and ready to take on a Power 5 opponent. Pairing him with Corley and Davis. There's a little bit of hesitation. I know Jalen Hall got a little more run against Hawaii. So he's getting more involved. I think that is why you see the depressed pricing for Dawood Davis. But Davis and Corley, I think, are very well insulated as far as targets. I think they're going to be I think Corley is the de facto number one receiver. And I think Dawood Davis, he's going to flutter around 2A, 2B with Jalen Hall. That's my take on that situation right now. Like I mentioned earlier, I do have Michael Trigg there for cheap, 3.4 as my third wide receiver. Touchdown upside and target upside for that cheap is always something that I'm going to look towards. And then I have Kendall Milton against South Carolina as my flex, 5.1K. It's another situation of if you're going to play a running back in a committee, choose the cheaper guy who also is the lead, getting the most attempts in that backfield. So I went with Kendall Milton. I'm thinking, anytime you get a chance to play a Georgia starting running back for that cheap, it's worth looking into.
So I want to run it by you real quick. You're looking at Georgia too. I actually looked at Milton as well. Kenny Mack is not too much more, but he is the one. So what's your thoughts on maybe playing like a Stetson Kenny Mack stack? Because there's some passing, Kenny Mack being the receiving back. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, his receiving role is nice. He's been very productive in that role so far this year. I like it. I tend to think, though, game script wise, I don't know how much passing they're going to have to do. I think this is one of those games. I mean, you always see it, especially kind of as we start to get into conference play. My mind immediately goes back to like Javonte Williams and who was his running back mate there at UNC?
Michael Carter, yeah.
Yeah, Michael Carter. Seeing them put up those big days, seeing I think Wake Forest a few years ago had some running backs who demolished a slate because we thought that we knew that they were going to be in a high scoring matchup. We thought the passing game was going to get the work, and they just smashed, and all of the touchdowns came on the ground, and they had two viable running backs. I think Georgia is definitely a team that we can see two viable running backs week in and week out. I'm not too worried about Kendall Milton, I think that he's got an established role, and I think it's pretty well insulated with game script. But I don't hate going McIntosh there either.
So K or Mox, what? Similar situation to like Michigan, right? So one week we played Corum, we played Edwards together. That was pretty good. I hit some money there that way. Do you think it's the same scenario going with Milton and Kenny Mack probably at the same time as far as your two running back selections? What's your thoughts there?
I don't think I would, but
Okay.
I just don't think I'll ever really go two running backs at the same time. Like Javonte and Carter were insane, and I always got beat by them because when you score as efficiently as they did in that offense, it's just my projection system just is not meant for it, right? Like I can't justify giving Javonte Williams like an 18% touchdown rate. Like that's just not, I can't. And he just literally continued to do it. I wouldn't have an issue. I don't think like you stack Stetson, and if you wanted to pair him with like a McIntosh, I could kind of see it. I'm very curious to see how Georgia plays, right? Like, are they just doing the whole passing thing because it's non-conference and they can? Like, do they change their offense when it comes to the conference? I think that would be really interesting to consider. Is do they become more run heavy? Because they certainly have not done it yet. and that feels more Georgia, right? But to kind of talk stacking quarterbacks, I'm a naked bow guy this week for sure. I think the things you think about when you consider stacking are yardage, and my general rule of thumb is like 260 yards. If he's going to throw for 260, then you probably have a guy that's going to be really good to use. And I think I have Bo at like 230. Does he have a viable like receiver one that gets like a pretty good target share? Not really. Like maybe, what is it, Troy Franklin? Maybe. Like we don't really know. This offense is very spread out. And then pricing, right? Like all these Oregon receivers are, with Georgia, you could throw in like a McConkey or a Mitchell or one of these guys, right? Because they're usually pretty cheap. Not anymore. Yeah. But, last year.
Washington's 3.9.
In years past, they were, right? Like last year, I swear, Mitchell was like 3.8 every single week, and I kept getting a bunch of them, right? That makes sense to say, hey, if I'm using Mitchell, then I want Stetson. I don't want to force all that Mitchell, but like you could do it theoretically that way. So for me, it's like, I think I would reverse it. Hey, if I'm going to use Franklin or Hudson or one of these Oregon receivers, then make sure Bo's in the lineup. At 5,500, that's just way too cheap. So he's actually the first quarterback I write about in my article that's coming out this week. So definitely on the same page there.
And then I think that's probably our stuff there. So that's our Bank on Them segment. Let's move on. And of course, we brought Chris on because we wanted to give you guys the basics on betting lines. So basically in this segment, Moxley's going to break down some tips and tricks that he has for you, just some things that he's noticed in his time as far as, the lines and different things like that. And the best ways to kind of keep stuff in mind as you're, doing these lines. Of course, can't, promote enough. Please go check out the NIL chat. That's probably where it's at, especially for last minute changes and then early lines as well. So I'm going to let Moxley take it away. Good sir. It's all yours.
Cool. Yeah. I can't emphasize enough either how valuable the NIL tier is for people looking to get in early. There's a lot of line movement in the season. So, the Sunday line is a lot different than the Saturday morning line. So that's a nice benefit of the Discord. And you get Ethan and Chris's awesome content, which I didn't have. Listen, I didn't have a DraftKings lineup because their articles and the show isn't released yet. I had to be on this show. So I unfortunately wasn't able to use their picks to construct a lineup. But this is what I do from a betting perspective. When I say a betting perspective, I mean against the spread, totals, stuff like that. Couple key kind of understandings. And pro betting, i.e. the NFL, is a lot different than college. So here are a couple things that I like to do. One, this is true of anything, regardless of where you go, what sport you do, etc. Shop around. Not all books post the same lines. If you feel confident in an over or an under or a pick against the spread, find the best value. There's no reason that you have to be picking DraftKings or FanDuel. You could go to Caesars. You can go to BetMGM. There are some smaller books out there as well where you can find a lot of value. Don't feel like you have to always stay committed to one book, especially if you're getting a point or a point and a half elsewhere. That revolves around a key number. And I'll even give you an example this week. North Carolina State and Texas Tech is available at 9.5 and 10.5 on different books. I have Texas Tech plus 10.5, but I would not play them 9.5 because 10 is a key number, which I'll talk about in a second. But shop around, seriously. Second, closing line value matters. How much the line that you got differs from what it closed at before kickoff. So you may get a line at -2, and it might close at 4.5. You get 2.5 points of closing line value, and in the grand scheme of things, especially if it passes a key number, incredibly important. The closing line, in my opinion, and I think this is fairly accurate, is the most specific and accurate description and expectation of the day's events. So beating that number, the number that it closes at, should increase your winning percentage over time, even if each time it doesn't matter. So long term, if you consistently beat closing line value or the closing line and you're getting positive closing line value, that should help. even if it doesn't matter on a week-to-week basis, right? I think last week we bet USC -8 and they smashed that cover out the window. But if they had won by 7 versus 9, we would have a little bit different conversation because that number closed a lot differently than it opened. Third, Sunday and Monday are prime betting opportunities for college. That isn't necessarily true in the pros. Lines generally release between like 1 and 3:30, 4 o'clock on Sundays. That's your first chance to bet that number. No money is coming yet. That is the number that the sportsbook pushes out and says, this is what we think it's going to be. A lot of times, sportsbooks are wrong. And the reason that they are wrong is because there's not as much money coming into the college game. They have less incentive to get some of these lower end lines right. So they might get a UGA line right. They might get an Alabama line right, but they might mess up on a UAB Georgia Southern line. They might mess up on a Northern Illinois Vanderbilt line. There's a lot less incentive when not as much money is going to come into that game. So that opportunity is our first chance to really look at what we think that line's going to be and test it against our numbers. And that's where I am in the Discord again, every Sunday afternoon, talking about those lines, talking about why I think try to figure out where Vegas messed up. And they do mess up. It's really hard to handicap 70 plus games each week. A lot harder than you think it is, especially when the money isn't there to get it right. They don't have as many college handicappers as they have NFL handicappers. That just benefits us. Fourth, feel free to get weird. And this is my favorite piece of advice because I like betting first quarter. I like betting first half. I like betting team totals. I like getting weird with these numbers. That is where the value lies. The spread is like always the safe play, but right? Like bet a first quarter. We bet Alabama -9.5 against Utah State. They're going to score more than 10 points and limit Utah State. Like these are the opportunities to take advantage of weird lines. Like don't be afraid to bet these bizarro weird totals and quarter spreads. Like the first quarter spread in the NFL is a joke. Like you would never bet that. But in college, when you have a high spread, you have a team that's much better than another, you might get a little value on that line. And we've seen that throughout the season. We're probably going to keep seeing it. I love team totals as well. And the one that I want to point out is Iowa came out today, 30.5 points. That is their team total. You're telling me the Iowa Hawkeyes are expected to score 30 points. I know it's Nevada. I know how bad Nevada is. 30.5 points. Just let that marinate for y'all. It's available on DraftKings and a couple other books. All right, last two. I've talked about key numbers. Understand what they are. Understand that 3, 7, and multiples of those numbers, generally speaking, are key numbers. 3, 7, 10, 14, 17, 21. Being on the right side of those numbers increases your chance of winning because a 20.5 spread is a lot more valuable than a 21-point spread because there's a much higher likelihood of a 21-point spread occurring and you losing that number than the 20.5 number. Being on the right side, 6.5, 2.5, those are huge, huge advantages versus a 3.5 versus a 7.5. There's a likely outcome based on key numbers that games end within an expectation. And it's true for totals too. The most popular game total in college football is 55. Being at 54.5 or being at 55.5, that matters a lot. And so making sure that you're on the right side of key numbers and not just blindly betting a 7.5 because you think this team is much better when the value just might not be there is one of the prime opportunities and one of the mistakes that I think a lot of people make. Lastly, and I don't want to go on forever, but this is my final piece of advice. Target what's unsexy. I play way more G5 than I do Power 5. And yeah, like Power 5 is on the TV and that's what people want to hear. Blah, 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 blah. Less money's coming in on these. I just talked about it earlier. If less money's coming in, there's a lot less incentive to handicap these games 100% correctly. That gives you an opportunity to take advantage of it because unless you're listening to this and you're $1 million, $500,000 better, you're probably doing pretty well if you're betting on Northern Illinois each week if we think that we're getting value on them. versus someone who's betting on Alabama or Texas each week. Don't be afraid to target unsexy matchups. Don't be afraid to get weird. Don't be afraid to do these funky things early in the week. Like, let's get freaky is all I'm gonna say. Let's get freaky. It's weird, it's uncomfortable, but that is college football betting in a nutshell.
We've gone to rated E now, right? Explicit.
I was gonna say, Chris, you have a limited amount of titles now that you can use now. So,
did I wait? How bad was it? How bad was I?
Oh no, that was perfect, man. I just love to see a freaky part. Let's get freaky. Let's get
freaky.
Bankroll.
Let's get freaky.
I love it. Let's do it. I might have to change the title of the actual show to "Let's Get Freaky" now, just because. Will it fly? I don't know. Maybe Apple won't like it. Spotify would.
Either that or hit the nuts, man.
Yeah,
hit the nuts.
Hit them with the nuts, man. Ethan, what you got, man?
I was just gonna say, I thought that was a lot of great points. Obviously, the one that like stuck in my mind is the fact of like betting on a G5 game versus a Power 5 game, like a Bama game, right? Like they're all over that number. They have people that are betting on the game, which then moves the line. But who's betting the UTSA versus UTEP game, right? Like there's not enough money on the game to really sway it. It kind of it makes me think of like PrizePicks where, somebody spots a line, they tell 20 people and all of a sudden, I don't know what the number is, $5,000 goes down on Rattler under 23.5 completions. And all of a sudden that number is now changing because of all the money on it, right? So there's less money on it. I think that specifically was one that really popped in my is going to stick in my mind, Moxley. So I appreciate that. That was awesome.
Yeah, I think too. That same thing kind of registered in my mind too. The idea of those, the value being in those lesser seen games, because I mean, if you think about it, just the same way that we talked earlier in the year about PrizePicks having those offerings that aren't quite as sharp to kind of encourage those different. Encourage more money to come in on different lines. The same thing. I mean, you're thinking about those guys who are stacking parlays. If you've got some value on a G5 game, I mean, it encourages them to take the risk, add a few more games on there. Same thing hits them with the fact that now all of a sudden you've got multiple games. The odds are even more in favor of the books. Having some weaker lines definitely does encourage the money to come in.
And I'll add on to your Moxley shopping around point. Some sites will have different juice. They'll have different levels of what it is, right? This is over as minus 110, but on another site, maybe it's minus 130. That seems like it's nothing, but if you're betting enough, that over time could be its own bet in itself, right? Like it repays itself back in the future.
Absolutely. And not to get too in the weeds with this, but if there's different juice on different sites, it might create an interesting middle opportunity depending on what you're getting each value at. So we won't dive into that too deeply, but just shop around. And if you see some disparaging numbers and some interesting juice, hit me up. I can help guide you a little bit there, but there's a way to middle some of these plays without risking a whole bunch.
And Moxley, if you want to give just a few names, I know there's some websites that kind of give you a wide cast of the different bets depending on the game. Do you have a favorite website that you like to look up the different lines and everything like that?
So my go-to is Vegas Insiders. I think they list 8 or 9 lines each week. They list the major books. I mean, they list DraftKings, Caesars, FanDuel, Bet Rivers, which is under a couple different names depending where you're at Sugar House, BetMGM. I mean, that's my go-to. And that's what I used to compare lines. So when I'm on live, regardless of where I am, I have that pulled up, generally speaking, and say, okay, I can get it at 6.5 versus 7 on Xbook. Vegas Insiders, they also release their own lines. I believe they're only available in Vegas though. But they're a great resource. Free, don't even need to sign up, don't need to do anything. If you're comparing books and you want to invest, just pull them up real quick. I guarantee with whatever you're using, they got it listed.
Yeah, I just want to bring that to attention for those that instead of going to each individual site and looking around, they have, like a third party that can kind of show you the difference in variance, and then you decide where you want to kind of hit that link and go to there as well. So just to wrap it up on everything, of course, we want to thank Moxley for coming on to the show. All that stuff is very valuable. Also, the whole thing about the numbers, the 3 and the 7s and stuff like that has really stuck with me. And that's something that I've used here in the past few weeks. It's just something about, you're looking at those football numbers, you're looking at a touchdown is 7, a field goal is 3, just kind of, you just add the math and what the outcomes can be. A safety is 2, and then it gets a little weirder. But at the same time, those numbers and those multipliers, matter the most as well. So to wrap up, I wanted to go into maybe a game that you're focusing on, or just something that you had in mind. I know Ethan wanted to bring up, just whether it's for CFF, for betting purposes, or maybe for a DK lineup or something like that. What's a game that you had, in mind that you're looking forward to, and anyone can kind of take on going first if you want to.
That I'm looking forward to,
or just intrigued with.
I'm not looking forward to seeing my Gamecocks play this weekend, if that's an answer. But no, I'm actually really curious to see the Syracuse-Purdue game. That's one of the games that I think is going to be very telling for both teams, because I think Syracuse's defense is a lot better than people think that defense is. They have some serious playmakers on the back end, and I don't think the front seven's all that bad either. I think they have 2 potential all-ACC corners. That team might be really good, and that team might beat Purdue straight up by more than a field goal this week, and I don't think people necessarily see that coming. So I'm really interested to see how that Syracuse defense plays. And obviously, the offense is just undergone a total overhaul with Robert Ney at the helm. I'm actually really interested in the Syracuse team, and I like watch Purdue because they're going to throw a bunch under Jeff Brom, so that's always fun. But that's a game that I'm probably most interested in seeing this weekend. I just think there's a lot of questions that are going to be answered by that, and we might see Syracuse go bowling this year. If I'm being honest, I think they might actually be a decent team that people might not be expecting.
It's the ACC. There's just chaos everywhere, and they've won a game already in the ACC.
Yeah, it stays I would be surprised. Too, so yeah, it's definitely interesting. I wanted to rant about Missouri real quick, and just to get it out there, what are they doing with Luther Burden? The man is the best player they have on their team. They're looking at snap counts now. I've seen on there as well. I'm just infuriated. The man, you take the man almost 101, 102 in your dynasty drafts. You're expecting the man to go off because he's supposed to be instant play. He goes off. He becomes Deebo Samuel of the college realm for one game, and now all of a sudden it's like last year or last week he didn't get anything, and now he's got. Now they're looking at, he was on the field too long. We're trying to get him the ball, but we're going to limit his counts. I'm just annoyed. And they play Abilene Christian, which is FCS. So I'm confused. I was like, do you put out your best players, or are they going to sit Pete now too and give him only 5 or 6, and kind of go from there? That's what I'm most interested in. I was like, what is Mizzou doing with their playmakers? Why Mookie Cooper over Luther Burden, who's far more superior in talent? It blows my mind. I just needed to vent real quick about Missouri football.
That's fair. I think this weekend, I'm always looking forward to watching Western Kentucky. They've got a 61.5 game total against Indiana. Indiana's favored by 6.5. I think I know all leading up to week 0, we were saying, all right, we're going to get our first look at Western Kentucky. We're going to finally figure out who this team is. I don't think we really know any more than we did coming in as far as that. Seeing them go up against a Power 5 opponent, I know it's Indiana. This will show us if this offense is something that we can consistently rely upon. That one in the Oregon BYU game as a dark horse as well. I know it's a little bit lower of a game total, but I think that's got sneaky shootout potential over there.
I think both those are fun ones. And I think we learned a lot about Western Kentucky, like you said, which is always great to see. I think we're going to get 2 straight weekends of an actual late night slate that's not just random teams, which is awesome. This late night slate's going to be potentially awesome. And I think the one it leads with is USC Fresno State. I think it does have shootout potential, right? It opened this goes to Moxley's point here early on. I saw it yesterday at 71.5 points. It's already at 73.5 points. Which I think crosses one of those probably common number of thresholds for totals. But that offense, USC looks unreal good on offense. And Fresno State has a great offense too between Hainer, Mims, Remigio, and Marino Cropper that just wants to make our lives harder as content people. So I think that'll be a great contest. And there was one other one. I mean, oh yeah, obviously, I think Texas Tech in NC State could be fun. We could see some shakeup at Texas Tech if Donovan Smith struggles. Do they panic and go with Morton? Do they just let it ride? Is Miles Price going to be consistent again? I mean, have another great game. He sat out a half last week and was awesome. Does this Nehemiah Martinez guy that we were kind of talking about in Slack, does he have a good game? Does price matter? I think there's some questions that'll be answered in that one as well, which will be fun.
Yeah, it's a really good week. Definitely some cool matchups for sure. Definitely match. So once again, I want to thank Mr. Chris Moxley for joining us on the episode as well. Just a reminder, get freaky when it comes to your betting line, guys. Make sure you do that as well. It's a go-to.
And don't forget to hit the nuts when you're playing fantasy DFS.
Yes, when you're doing DFS, kick them in the nuts. Do what you got to do. Get that money, increase that bankroll. That's what we're here for. But we want to thank you for listening in, and we will see you next time. Peace.